Welcome to Work is Weird Now. Today's guest is Chloe Alana Williams. Chloe is a strategist, writer, speaker, and co-founder of Eighth Day, known for exploring the changing relationship between work, ambition, identity, and family in modern life. Welcome, Chloe.
Thank you. Delighted to be here today.
And Chloe's going to help us answer today's core question, which is, if family is no longer the plan, what are we working for?
Right.
Big
I'm delighted
question.
to talk about this. It is. And I think it's a really topical question at the moment because so much in our world is changing. And I think I was thinking about this the other week, when I was chatting to someone and we were talking about the broken promise of adulthood. We were told work hard, have a career, you'd progress in that, then you could buy a house. And then once you had the house, you could have a family. And I was thinking about it as a stool, and those are three different legs. And for a lot of generations, those three legs just held. Like if you were a boomer, it was really easy. That was invisible. Life looked like that. And now if you're Gen Z entering the workforce, all three legs of that stool have been completely kicked out. There's no job security. It's seemingly impossible to buy a house these days. And as you know, birth rates are declining rapidly at the same time. So really, what are adults working for right now is the big question. And what does that mean for how we actually think about work and the companies we give the vast majority of our time to?
It's so interesting because it is a really provocative question, right? Because if we say, what are people working for if family isn't the plan? That assumes that family was the reason we were working for before, and things like you said, the house, which is ultimately for a family, and so on. So I guess my big question is, do we assume that that was what motivated people to work in the first place? Is that what people have been working for?
Yeah, I think it was, I talk a lot about it as like mirrors. Everyone looked at each other and it was like, this is what life looks like. You get a job, you get married, you have a family, you've got a home. Like we all followed that path. And now really we're all living what I'm calling kaleidoscope lives. So we have to turn that mirror 90 degrees because we're all doing those things out of sync, even if we do them at all. So we might jump around different careers, we might move countries, we might do things out of order, have a child, then buy a house, get married 10 years after that. And I think we still expect that linear path to exist. And that is the social message that we're all given still to this day. And I think we've not adjusted what that means for how we think about work and what we're looking for then from employers, because a new generation are having to really say, well, if these are not the possibilities in my future, then what am I actually really doing this for?
And it's unpicking what success means for people, right? Because I turned 40 last week and my husband, we went out for lunch and we always had like a coaching session of like, entering your 30s, did you think that this is what 40 would look like? And the first thing that we actually talked about before even about having kids, because that was probably a bit more expected, was that work, I did not think in a million years that I'd be where I'm at right now. And that's unpicking what my career trajectory of being ingrained in me from school. And it's the same, right? Where we've got to unpick that definition of success and the linear path in all of those elements.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned turning 40 because there are a lot of stats about the age a woman is when she has her first child that came out this year. And for the first time ever in the UK, more women are having their first child in their 30s. So we've designed out teenage pregnancy, which is amazing. And now rather than your 20s, you're moving up into your 30s. But actually, we're seeing a lot of people now having their first child in their 40s. So if you think about it, you could have one woman 25 having a child, one woman 35 having a child, and one woman 45 having their first child. All completely different life paths and shapes. And, like Anne Hathaway's announced she's having her third child at 43, Hilary Swank had her first ones at 47. And I think it's another way all our life paths are changing, that we are, as women, investing in our careers first, establishing that, and then going, well, now is a good time. And I hate that phrase, the time, because I know every conference I've been to, someone puts their hand up and goes, when's a great time to have children? And everyone goes, there never is a great time. You just do it. And I think that's the interesting thing, that all these things used to be synchronized and now we're all doing them out of sync as well.
I mean, that seems very much like the reality for our generation, right? That we have been putting off our careers, and so therefore we've been gradually having children later. And now apparently we are getting up to late 40s, which just makes me feel very tired. But what about the emerging generations? Because I assume that the falling birth rates there are due to a wider variety of influences. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like choice. Like do I want to have children? I think lots of people in their 20s are asking themselves that. And I think part of that is having seen their mothers go through this way of life, seeing them trying to manage it all, having a successful career, keeping the family going. They're looking at that and going, is that what I really want for myself? Do I want this way of working? But also with the broken promises of, I'm not going to have a job for life. It's going to be impossible to buy a house. So I think there's a lot of reassessment from women in their 20s. And there's that big trend going on at the moment, celebrating loneliness, and the ability to go home on a Friday night, have a bottle of wine and a pizza, and that being a good thing. And I think for the first time, women have got more choice than ever. And now we're actually going, well, what does that actually mean? And what do I want? And I think those in their 20s, the ones that are really kind of picking in that quite a lot.
I saw a brilliant meme, and obviously memes are everything in our society now. And it was the Gen Zs are not having kids because the millennials have been so vocal about it on social media. They've terrified the life out of them in doing so. And it made me laugh because that was what it was meant to do. But it was almost like we've changed about how vocal we are about our feelings about things and like the reality of what things are actually like, be it work, be it life, be it having kids, whatever. And it's just, people are, I think is that what I really want, and not just following it because that's the trajectory that society's told me, but also, I also think there's obviously the negative factors around, can they afford to do that? And like, if the job landscape is, you're never going to get a job because AI is going to get your job, I'm obviously being dramatizing all of this. It's like, is that even possible? And I think there's just so many more question marks now. There's choices, and then also the landscape of the macro environment.
Yeah, totally. And I love your point about the vocalness, because I think we're really good now at saying, like, being a mum is really hard. These are the things you have to give up. And I think, a lot of stuff on Instagram and TikTok is talking about the reality. There's that kind of, you've got the trad wife version, which is, sugarcoating one version of life. But then you've got the reality. And I think we're really vocal about the reality now because something has to change. And I think what's really interesting is that in Japan, actually the birth rate has started to increase a little bit, and the marriage rate. And what they've done is, rather than just giving a one-off, you've had a baby, here's $5,000, they've actually said from 0 to 18, they've removed a lot of the costs. So they've actually thought about, the full spectrum of childhood. And that's where you need to change and focus your efforts, because we all know this one-off, baby bonus at the start is not going to really change things. It's that 0 to 18 where you really need the full spectrum of support. And they now, for the first time, are starting to see a change in what's happening to their birth numbers, which I think they're going to be one to watch to see what can we learn from how they're doing it. Because like South Korea, they're one of the closest to seeing birth rates declining under 1.
Yeah, and we've also seen stats around the mental health of young people, right? And we've seen the declining rates of drinking, which, let's face it, probably has something to answer for in terms of sex, which is obviously essential for procreating as well. And we've seen declining rates of that too. So all of these factors are probably influencing whether or not people are likely to have children in their 20s, certainly.
Yeah, and I think work itself, that's where people used to meet their partners, and friends of friends. Like, that social connection is like, where do people go to meet people now? Like, that's the interesting thing as well. Church used to be one way of doing it, then it was university, then it was in the office, or there were third spaces, going to the pub. Those spaces have all kind of collapsed now. We're seeing pubs close at the fastest rate in the UK this year. So you just think, well, people want partners, they're saying, but it's finding them as well. That's really tough. And I think AI partners has increased 700% in the last couple of years. So they're seeking connection to another, but actually they're finding it in a really weird place.
Yeah, and I wonder how much the manosphere adolescence kind of thing is influencing it as well, because it seems almost like there's a little bit of a fissure between the sexes too, right? So they're almost more likely to look at each other with a bit of suspicion and less likely to come together in maybe some of those conventional shared dynamics ways.
Yeah, the best example I've seen of this was in the US, where they surveyed I think they were 18 to 29, and they asked them, what are the values of a successful life? Like, how will they know are they successful? And they asked Kamala Harris voters and Trump voters, men and women. For Trump voting men, top was having a child, family. And then it kind of ticked down from there. For women, whether you voted for Harris or Trump, having children was not in the top 10. It was,
Wow.
having a successful career, having great well-being, supporting others. And I thought that was fascinating. For women, regardless of voting, actually having a family is now like, I need to do all these things first, and then I can do that. Whereas for men, it was like, have a family. And it was totally different how they looked at it. And I thought that was just fascinating, because you look at the divide between men and women, we keep talking about it. And that's like a big way it's coming to life. If you're both going into, this is what my aspirations are, and you go into your careers with that, I want to do this first. It's just fascinating, because I think we still hear that narrative. And there's that stat, when a woman gets married, everything goes backwards for her and it gets worse. When a man gets married, it shoots up. That narrative is all over the place at the moment still.
So we're about to get a new prime minister. If you were advising government on what they can do to increase birth rates again, what would you say were the first things they needed to look at?
I mean, I think that Japan example is quite interesting. Like, how can you actually help support the entire life cycle, from 0 to 18? What can we actually do to change it? And I also think like work stability is one of the biggest problems at the moment. If you don't feel a sense of stability in your job, you're less likely to, commit to what is a long-term decision for 18 years at a bare minimum. So I know there's a lot of people that say they want 2 children. They end up having 1. And often that's because the cost, it's taking on that additional risk, and then just not feeling like it's worth it at that point financially and for their own career. So I think we're hearing that desire is still, I want 2 children, but you end up with 1. And I think there are a lot of people now going from 1 to none, because they're just not achieving what they think is the bare minimum to be able to have children. So I think you have to look at it for the different generations. And I think it's super interesting that we've got 5 generations in the workplace at the same time, and they've all come into it with different values, different needs. And how do you think about what someone in Gen Z needs versus that kind of boomer at the top end who's leaving?
And what about employers? What do you think employers should be doing to support that?
I think like stability is really important. And I was thinking like, how do we change work contracts? At the moment, in the US, you get 28 days. We get a bit more security in the UK. But how can we offer people a sense of, here's a 3-year contract, here's a 5-year contract, like we do with our mortgages, can you have a fixed term one? Or like looking at tenure in the academic world. What can we do to make people feel like they've got a sense of stability to be able to start putting down roots? Jobs, we went to 0 hours contracts, like all of the things that used to give that sense of job for life have gone. And I think it goes back to those, 3 legs on a stool. Like, it amazes me that in the US, you get a 15-year mortgage. Like in the UK, we get 2 on average. Like, how can we change all the things we've got so that just people feel more comfortable taking on that risk, and we can spread it out over a much, much bigger time frame?
Yeah, I think that there's loads of really good ideas in there. I do also wonder, to what extent do we stop expecting corporations and governments to answer these stability questions for us, right? Because at the moment, the reality is that very few of us, including the people at the top of these various different organizations, can really predict what's going to happen, particularly around the technology aspect and what that impact is going to be on work. I mean, we're talking about a real sort of existential challenge to the very foundations upon which we built economies, right? By challenging the knowledge worker. And so I guess where does personal responsibility come into it? So where do you think people should be looking in order to create their own sense of stability? What moves can they make to gain some level of control over the situation?
Yeah, I think, again, looking at that younger generation, I don't know if you saw it, but they were talking about them having 2 careers. They're hedging their bets, and they're having portfolio careers and having 2 full-time things at the same time. So they're actually getting their income streams from multiple places, which is giving them a sense of, well, if this goes down and this goes up, I can balance it out. Managing that risk themselves, either through their side hustles or actually taking on 2 full-time jobs and working them very smart where one doesn't know about the other. And I think that's the way a lot of people are thinking about portfolio careers now, because to your point, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where AI might target next. We don't know which categories are going to go down, and how we live our lives will change. You just look at politics at the moment and instability. All of that is increasing the cost of living, which none of us can plan for in the same way.
Yeah, so I'm gonna float an idea here that I've been noodling over in the last couple of days. So I totally agree with you. I think everybody, particularly young generations, needs to start thinking, having a portfolio mindset towards work, because it's really the only move we can make towards trying to future-proof and de-risk our futures. I think a really good framework for that could be something something to grow, and somewhere for flow. So basically, we've got what you know, which is essentially where you take your expertise and the things that you can pretty much count on in terms of generating some income for you, at least in the short term, right? So it's the things that we've all built our careers on to date. For young people, it would be whatever they got their degree in, whatever expertise they can develop around a certain topic. Then we've got this idea of growing something. So actually, where do you think things are going to go in the future? What is something that might be needed later on? And how can you start building a side hustle around that? So how can you either take your existing expertise and pivot it, or how can you start nurturing something that you expect will be desirable to solve a problem of the future? And then we have the closed space. So the place where you get to try something out, experiment, learn quickly, do all the things that we know will be really vital for the future, develop that curiosity. For us, it's this podcast, right? This is our space of experimentation and failure and trying things out.
I think a timestamp, I think a model's just been born. We just timestamp that moment, because a new model, like a book has just fallen from the sky, at 9:53 on Tuesday, the 23rd of June. It's so it's beautiful though, because honestly, I had a glass of wine the other night and I had a rant to my husband, and I was like, we need to think of something, and we need to just start, we've got knowledge between us. We're both in our 40. There's got to be something here that we get creative. And he looked at me like I had 10 heads. But he's in that linear career path, right? And there's no side hustle, anything like that. Whereas I was speaking to somebody in one of our agencies that I've worked with for a long time, and she was like, yeah, my generation, we have the 9 to 5 and we all have a 5 to 9. It's just normal. It's so normal. And that's amazing, right? I think that's an amazing mindset. But for everybody else, you've got to really push yourself out of the comfort zone, right?
I actually wrote an article on the weekend where I talked about women having to become featurists in their own lives. So in my day job, I plan features for clients, and there's a model called Horizon 1, 2, and 3. And really, Horizon 1 is where we are now and what we can do today. Horizon 2 is adapting, making hacks with what's around us. But Horizon 3 is where we'd like to go. And I think, exactly as you're saying, we have to think around Horizon 3's there. What do I do today to start making that a reality in my life? And I was talking about it from a fertility perspective, women are freezing their eggs now in Horizon 1 so they can allow Horizon 3 later on, that they can enable a family, they can buy themselves time to do these other things. And I think we have to start thinking about that, planning ahead. And I think women naturally do it a lot more than men because we're big planners. 100%. We think okay, where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 5 years? How do I make that happen? And I think it's an innate ability that we have, and thinking and applying that to our careers is a really key thing for us to all do going forward, because what was safe is not going to be safe in the future. And there are all these amazing things emerging that, how do we get women playing with AI more? It's fascinating. There's not enough women doing anything with it. Let's just say you can run a business with AI now. We're going to see the first billionaire who's just one person with AI doing things. And I think that's going to be super interesting, just getting women to kind of embrace these things. And I do a lot of work with women in innovation. And one of the big things we've seen in the last few years is that funding for women is decreasing. Which is crazy. You would think we would be having access to more funds now, but a lot of it is because women don't build things that are distinct. We're really great at having ideas, but we don't have protected IP. And I think that's something we as women need to start thinking about a lot more. How do we create something that only we can own, we're the experts in, that no one else can duplicate? Because that's how we protect our future. We create something that is uniquely ours and is ring-fenced.
Yeah. I think that's 100% the experience we've had in events like She Shapes AI, where it's become really clear to us that there's a lot of potential for women at the moment, despite the fact that funding is declining and that women are constantly locked out of VC conversations and things like that. We know that AI also gives women an opportunity to build something on their own if they can gain that focus and that definition around what they're building. And also the lived experience becomes so much more valuable. Right. So if you have had a problem in a healthcare system, which is an example of something that we saw, you can build a solution to it. And that experience that you've had is really valuable, right? Whereas in a VC room, that's not something that they're going to be interested in. They want to see your CV. They want to know you've built things before, and so on and so forth. So I think it's this weird dichotomy of loads of opportunity and the same kind of patterns that I think women tend to default to. And on that, You've spoken quite a lot on the mental load in the context of this three-legged stool that you're talking about. And we're being told to have more kids, and we're being told by some people, Elon Musk in particular, maybe the most famous one at the moment. And we're being told it's our fault. I saw an article in the Telegraph the other day that made that point. And yet we also have to shoulder a lot of the load of both work and life in our kind of 30s and 40s. So what are your thoughts on how we start to liberate ourselves from that a bit?
So I think what was interesting, I don't know if you saw it the last couple of weeks, the phone was getting blamed for falling birth rates as well, because someone had mapped when the mobile phone was introduced, how that had impacted falling birth rates. So
Correlation does not equal causation.
Exactly. Everyone is looking for someone to blame in this. And I think it's really easy to blame women. And what's interesting is we track birth rates through women. You know, we don't measure men having children because it's much easier to measure women because we have a finite period of time that we can have children in. So it's really easy to point the finger at women. And I got so angry a couple of months back. You know, the Daily Mail published an article was like, women denying men fatherhood. And that's not the right narrative. It needs to be about how do we create a world where everyone can become a parent if they want to. You know, the problem is the world we've created. If you want to be a parent, great, you should have that opportunity. But if you don't want to become a parent, that's also totally okay. You know, let's not force someone into doing that. I mean, Russia announced this year, if a woman says she doesn't want children, she gets sent to therapy.
Oh my God.
You know, she's an inherent narrative that she is broken because she doesn't want children. And I think that's that. How do we enable women to have choice and not inflict other people's choices onto them? Because there is a rise of people who don't have children, and I don't have children. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago if my life would be like that, I would have said no, because I expected my life to pan out in a very specific way. And I've had to come to terms with how my life has ended up. But I think society still imposes judgment on women and how their lives end up. And I think that's the really tricky thing. You know, it's balancing women having choice to do what they want. If you want to have kids, let's make a world where you can have 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids. But let's also recognize that there might be people out there who don't want to do that too.
And it's absolutely fine. Like, don't need to have that judgment or stigma around it.
Yeah. So why is this such a passionate topic for you? Why are you devoting your life to writing and talking and sharing information around this topic?
I think because, you know, I'm 47. I've ended up living a life that when I was 27, I didn't think was going to be the life I was living. And I think a lot of it, you know, I didn't make conscious choices for my life to become this way, but in a way I did. You know, I invested in my career, I dated, I moved country, you know, I've done lots of different things. I've had to realize there are not that many role models showing my way of life. And, you know, it's like, I love kids. Like, I'm fully supportive of, you know, my friends who have kids. And that's, you know, we should all be able to have the life that we want to live. And I wanted to start talking about there are alternative ways. And I think Dan, you made the point about, you know, motherhood isn't all that great. Being able to talk openly as a mother, that there are tough moments with that as well. But I think there are also tough moments not having children that we don't talk about. You know, there is a way, and Elizabeth Day is really good talking about this, you know, you have to grieve that life as well. You know, there is an end to that life and you have to grieve that so you can imagine a different kind of life coming through. So, you know, a lot of people end up without children for different reasons. And there's this kind of blanket, you don't have kids. There can be infertility. There can be you didn't want them. You can end up without kids by circumstance, and recognizing all those different paths are ways that life can pan out.
I've read and listened to a lot of Elizabeth Day stuff, and also I went to see Joanne McNally last week, who told the story. She's obviously bloody hilarious, but she told the story in a very funny way. But it was brilliant in the sense that, yes, she hasn't had children and she's had to deal with that, but she's also lost friends for a period of time and that's obviously and she explained it in a way like they off the ship, going off on the ship at the end of the show. She was like, but I was waiting for them when they came back. But she's also almost had to grieve that, you know, friendship dynamics changing and those things. And this is why it really irritates me that there's so much stigma and judgment put on women that don't have children, because you don't know the reason, but there's almost so many different layers to it too that you just may not know or realize. And I think that's why the beauty of your work of talking about all of that and people like Elizabeth Day is just brilliant, you know, and I'm grateful that we can all speak so freely about those topics now too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It's the default still. Like I always joke that I got into a cab in Chicago and the first thing the cab driver goes is, you know, do you have kids? And you say no. And then they don't know what to do as the follow-up.
Yeah,
There's
awkward.
just kind of this
Yeah.
silence, and you're like, and then it's like, are you married? I'm like, no. And then it's like, oh God, now what do I,
Yeah.
what do I
Oh gosh, yeah.
And you would never ask a man that. Like, it's not the way they would start a conversation with a man. And I don't think we found a new way to ask about our lives. And that's the interesting thing. And I totally hear you, Dad. Like, people disappear in and out your lives. And what's interesting is like, that all used to happen in sync. Like everyone have their babies at the same time, but now everyone's having babies at different times. So they're coming in and out in different rhythms. So I think our lives are just non-linear, and we still expect them to kind of move in the same way, and it's totally changed.
I've said it before
Yeah.
as well. I had some comments around when I went on first mat leave of don't make promises you can't keep about coming back to work. You won't come back. And how do you know I won't come back? Like, you don't know my financial situation, my drive, my ambition, like all of those different things. And it's just, we've got to really like
Don't know how
unpick
much I'll
and-
like my kids or how much I'll like motherhood.
Yeah,
I haven't tried it yet.
it's just all of those assumptions that feel so outdated at this moment in time. Like, think before you speak and be curious and ask the questions, but don't make those big assumptions, you know?
But it's all
Yeah.
these mental models that we're carrying around, right? So
Everything.
it is the one
Yeah.
around family, but it's the one around work too. I mean, we've had many discussions on this podcast about people saying, what do you do? And if it doesn't fall into like a single word, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a accountant, whatever, it's almost like people glaze over. And I would challenge anybody in my life, no matter how long they've been in my life, my family, my friends for decades, to actually articulate what I do for a living. Nobody can do it. It's because it's never been one of those things that fits into a box. And it's really hard for people.
Totally. My parents will kill me. I was telling this story at a wedding the other week. I have the same. Like, I have a career that's not easy to describe to other people. So I'm one of 3 daughters, and they will go, well, one's the doctor, one's the singer, and Chloe lives in London.
Yeah.
Nice. And it's just like, there's this like, we can't say what she is, so she just dwells in a city. That
Right.
is what she does for a living. But I think your point about those classic careers like doctor, accountant, lawyer, they're the ones that are getting disrupted by AI. Like, they were the
Absolutely.
safe ones to go into now. And those are the ones that are under threat the most. So I think, we're going to see all that changing as well. Like, you're not going to gravitate to those in the same way. Caregiving, where you need to be physically present, will be there. But like, lawyers, accountants, all of that is getting targeted first by AI. And I think that's going to really disrupt how do people entering university now think about where the stability is.
Yeah. It's almost like they were the elite. They were the elite definition of success, weren't they? When we were going to school, it was like red brick uni to be one of these 3 or 4 things. Everyone else, it was like, oh, you're over in this box, right? Okay, yeah, fine. C grade, grade B or a C, great. You shimmy over here. What is it you're going to do? So, yeah, but we're unpicking that too.
But thank God we're unpicking that, because it's
Thank
an absurd way to run a society, right? That you're determined at 14 years old what your value is going to be and how much money you're going to make. And so therefore you're set off in a particular path. And actually we know now that there are so many different skills that can come together in a variety of different ways to add value to people, society, and so on. And I think in some ways, because I'm an eternal optimist and because I do think that there's a potential better future for work that could come out of this, in some ways, let's tear it all down. Let's burn it to the ground and say, okay, let's rebuild something else. I think the challenge is that we as humans like order, we like structure, we like putting things in boxes. And so how are we going to be able to build the skills we need to be much more flexible and open, especially when, politics, so on, trying to constantly polarize, divide, reduce everything to a single state. It's a really big challenge we've got. But as I said, I'm an optimist.
No, I totally, because I think, how many companies resisted working from home and then COVID happened? I think there has to be a big point that disrupts behavior, because people won't do it unless there's like a radical disruption to it. How many businesses have tried a 4-day working week, different patterns, summer Fridays, all those things. I think when you get forced to do it, you actually realize it's possible, and then things can change. I think we as people just inherently kind of find excuses not to do something in a different way.
And I think this takes us all the way back to the beginning of the discussion, which is, if we are not building work for family, what are we working for? If we go back to first principles and really redesign work, what are we working for as society?
Yeah, I think that there's two things that keep coming up in as you think about what we're losing as people. I think that is the ability to kind of imagine and be creative. You know, we are outsourcing that to AI. And I think it's really important that work still celebrates that, but also physical connection with others. Like, you know, that's what work used to be great at, putting people in each other's orbit, talking to each other, whether you worked in retail, behind a till, you were interacting with other people, or you work in an office. We need to value that sense of community that work used to bring, because we're losing that everywhere at the moment. You know, we're not fostering connection with one another. And I think work could play a really big role in that. And you're like, we're all talking about, you know, the dumbing down of the way we think. And I think that's a really important thing for us to make sure that people are still, that there is humanity in everything we do. And there are people as part of these processes as well.
And that's ultimately what family is about, right? Is community and humanity, right? And we don't actually need to have a family to find community and humanity, right? All we need is connection with other people. And if ultimately that's what we work for, then that feels like a really good goal. I think we've solved all of society's problems. So well done. That only took us 40 minutes.
33 minutes and 57 seconds. I suppose if we were 20 years on, looking back again, what do you think it might look like, or hope it might look like? What would you have, you know, like to have changed, or where we'd be at?
Yeah, I think there's, you know, I talk a lot about generation zero. And if we don't start changing things now, we're going to get to a threshold where maybe half of the population don't become adults. And we can either start changing what we do now to prevent that, or we can keep going down that path. And we might find in 20 years' time that people are just living even more disconnected lives. You know, that they've got a house for one, they're living a solo life. They might, you know, find enjoyment in different ways. But I think we're at a point where we can make a decision around what kind of future should we be making for people. And I think we are at this threshold. And the interesting thing about Generation Zero is we won't know it's happened till after it's happened. You know, we will discover that we have got the first generation that have half the population haven't had children when it's too late. We can only measure it after the fact. And if we don't start thinking about it now, we're going to end up in somewhere that none of us really wanted to happen, because we're just burying our heads in the sand.
If people want to find out more about you and read more about these topics we've discussed today, what's the best way to do that?
So I have a Substack called Natalism Nudges, and I publish a lot of my thinking on LinkedIn. And I have a website called chloealana.com that you can find links for everything. And I'm on Instagram as much as it doesn't naturally come to me. I'm doing that too.
Gotta step out of that comfort zone. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chloe. That was a really interesting discussion. Really appreciate you chatting with us today, and we'll look forward to more in the future.